So Willie, you're very welcome and thank you for taking part in our series today. We thought that you'd be an interesting candidate to interview because of your role in terms of pastoral care, which we'll come to a little bit later on in the day. But we're looking at Kilkenny as a place and Kilkenny as a sense of home. Now for you, Kilkenny is indeed not only your professional home, but it's also your personal home. You're born, bred and brought it.
Yeah, absolutely. I was born in the heart of the village. Very proud village man in a place called St. Ficre's Place, which again is well known. I was a neighbour of a very famous Kilkenny archaeologist and author, John Bradley, whom I grew up with, who is a man who wrote extensively on Kilkenny and Kilkenny City and the medieval sense of Kilkenny City. I went to school, primary school locally in St. John of God Convent, then moved on, as we all did in those days, to the De La Salle, and then secondary education in St. Kieran's College. So rooted here, not just in my young life, but all my life practically.
What was Kilkenny like when you were growing up? What kind of were the activities that you engaged in as a kind of a young fella?
Sure. Well, of course, I remember you're talking to a village man.
Of course. So come on with
there you go. And I went to the De La Salle, so therefore you have it straight away. But again, hurling was the key point, in growing up. Not so much for me as such, but certainly for Kilkenny. But I think some of the key points in Kilkenny was very different then, in the sense that, maybe it was smaller, obviously. People were more connected with each other because they knew each other. Despite the great divide that existed between the parishes, but there was always this connection that you had relatives living in some other part of the city. So therefore the city was very familiar to you. And for that reason, it was kind of, again, it was a place called home.
Having a priest in the family was that famous Irish phrase that was a highly coveted thing. Talk to me about your journey towards God.
Yes.
Did you find God or did God find you?
I would think that in many ways God found me. And he found me through the people whom I encountered on my journey through life. And that's going back, whether it's going back to my parents' faith, growing up in St. Patrick's Parish in Kilkenny, the experience of good priests, parish priests. And in those days, again, because the communities were smaller, you knew the priest and the priest knew you. So in our sense at home, the priest would visit maybe once a week and drop in on a Wednesday evening, I always remember. So there was a connection. And then, of course, going to a John of God school run by the Sisters of St. John of God, the De La Salle school run by the De La Salle brothers, and then St. Kieran's College. So it really was kind of a faith encounter journey all the way through. But my own vocation came simply, of course I would have thought about it, many times over the years, but simply from a question that a priest asked me in St. Kieran's College, have you ever thought of becoming a priest? And from that moment...
Had you? What was the answer?
Well, yes, I would have said, of course, yes, because I had thought in primary school of becoming a priest. And again, it was because of the witness of the priests I knew and the priests I saw, and their life and their connection with the people. And particularly, I suppose, I grew up in also the Bishop Birch era. So Bishop Birch was there, and he was a man who was immersed in social services and in the needs of the poor and the marginalised. And this was a great attraction for me, in looking at vocation and looking at priesthood. And I think it has permeated right through my life. A sense of kind of justice, a sense of looking out for the poor and the needy that I really experienced at a young age, but that kind of I encountered and brought with me through my whole time.
Can I ask you a question, Willie? And I'm asking it in a very sensitive and non-callous way. Was it the right decision, or was it a decision that you made to be right for you?
Yes.
Looking back now,
yes.
Because of all life experiences,
sure.
Was it the thing to do?
Yeah.
Do you regret it?
No, if you were to ask me the question, would I do it again? I'd say yes.
Okay.
I wouldn't even have to hesitate. I love being a priest. I love the ministry of priesthood, and it's difficult now and challenging in the present time, in the present world, the present church situation. Yes, it is. But yes, I would do it all over again for the simple reason is that I can only speak right up to this moment of this interview with you.
Yeah.
Up to now, I'm very fulfilled in priesthood. And that fulfillment comes from a sense of course, serving God in the spiritual sense, but it also comes from a sense of encounter with people. And the people you meet who, not only whose lives you try to enrich, but whose lives enrich you and give you a purpose for living.
Is it difficult to be the ecclesiastical poet as a prophet in their own town?
Something, it's not. I love it. For the simple reason is this: if I walk down High Street, Rosine Street, John Street, Kieran Street, if I walk down James's Street, no matter what street I walk down, I meet people who know me, who not only know me, but know my family and the generations of my family. So there's this wonderful sense of family and community that you form part of as the priest. And now I live out in the country in Clara, and there's still that wonderful, wonderful connection with people. So for me, yes, I would do it all over again. Yes, it's wonderful working in my home environment because I know the people and the people know me. And when that happens, there's a greater level of trust because people know who you are, people know where you've come from, and people know where you belong. So there's this wonderful sense of trust in knowing.
We're living in a world, I suppose, that leadership is so highly scrutinised. I'm conscious of the fact that your role in the community, and we're really getting a sense today and right throughout all of our interview series of the sense of communities. Your role with regard to pastoral care and being the custodians of people's pastoral journeys and pastoral requirements. And, I want to talk to you, I want you to talk to me about the responsibility of that. And as you're doing so, I'm cognizant, as I'm sure are you, over the years, that, people's belief and their access to religion has become much more a la carte in terms of where they feel their need for it is.
Yes.
Talk to me, Willie, how that sense of responsibility sits with you, firstly, and how you discharge that sense of responsibility to create it to be a kind of a fulfilled sense of ecclesiastical or pastoral care for your community.
Sure. Yeah, I'm reminded of the words of St. John Henry Newman, who said, "With you I'm a Christian, for you I'm a priest. Being a Christian is a high ideal, being a priest is a heavy responsibility." And in that sense, that kind of there is a heavy responsibility, on me as a priest, because really the work of the priest, the ministry of the priest, the life of the priest is really for the care of the souls of the people. And that means really the care of the spiritual development of each person, of any age that the person is at. And that's a heavy responsibility, especially now in the world we're living in, where, as you say, people can choose, they can pick. I mean, 50 years ago, 40 years ago, people walked to Mass. There was no option. There was no other choice. So they connected with their own church and their own parish. But now people have this sense that they can pick and choose, where they want to go, who they want to listen to, what they want to do. But what I've noticed in the last number of years is despite maybe the distance that we feel is happening with the church, there is still a return. And I think that, people are returning because people are beginning to realize that maybe the things that we think that life has meaning for us don't have meaning. Maybe the things we think are important are not really important. And maybe it's getting back to the basic Christian calling. And the basic calling of the church, the Catholic Church, is the call to love. And I think people are beginning to realize that more and more, that to touch base or to get back with the important issues in life that can be found in the church. So where do they turn? They turn to the church, they turn to the priest. A struggle, a difficulty, a worry and anxiety, a depression, a sin, a fear, a fault. What do? They turn to the person whom they can trust, or they turn to the person perhaps whom they feel have all the answers, but most important of all, have the empathy. And that's where I think the priesthood comes in. And that's where the responsibility of the priest in relation to the carrying and the caring and the concern and the empathy with his people is important.
I feel, having watched you down through the years, I suppose, from my own role in KCLR and lots of other things,
sure,
where I've seen and encountered you, notwithstanding kind of the ability to discharge the duties or the responsibilities of the liturgy, you have been, with respect, that kind of almost that rock and roll maverick type. And I'm mindful of the phrase, and you've used lots of phrases yourself, that to sing is to pray twice.
Yes,
but you have very much incorporated music, and that sense of kind of joy. Of course, we're all familiar with your role in the gospel choir, that kind of brings us back to some kind of maybe a church gathering in kind of Alabama or Mississippi or whatever.
Yes, excellent. Yes.
But tell me about the importance of music in your being, in your sense of self,
sure,
and in your sense of your ability to do your job.
Absolutely. And I think, music is so important for all of us. I mean, if I was to ask you or anybody else today, to name me their favorite song, or even name me their favorite hymn, they would say yes. Everybody has a favorite song that in some way resonates with a time in their life, a time of difficulty, a time of happiness, a time of struggle, or a time of peace. And for that reason, music it's part of who we are. It's part of our life's experience. And for me in ministry, music is extremely important because, for example, the gospel choir, as you mentioned, Edward, the word gospel means good news. And therefore, for me, when I became involved in gospel music, it really made sense to be involved in it because obviously it's good news. And I spend my whole life trying to minister the good news. But music is important because it reconnects us with the whole sense of who we are and maybe also, the sense of who we desire to be. If we go to the Psalms, for example, and we find that all the Psalms tell the journey of every single human person through difficulty, struggle, through sadness, through joy, through happiness. So that music, what it does is it touches the inner sense of who we are. For me, again, as the question you asked, in ministry, I've used music quite a lot, obviously. Going back maybe when I was in 5th year in Kieran's College or even in Leaving Cert, being involved in St. Mary's Folk Choir, which was based here in the city, and then moving on from there to being involved in different choirs, and then the experience when I went to live in Washington DC of encountering and meeting with gospel choirs. And suddenly I thought to myself, for people maybe who feel disenfranchised from the church, or people who can't understand the language of the church, or people maybe who don't understand the culture of the church, that music touches them. And because music, as I said, speaks of all the different emotions in our lives, that it draws people back and draws people in. So for me, in using ministry, use music in ministry, it really gives me that sense of reaching out and touching people with something that every single person, even if you can't sing or play an instrument, encounters in their lives.
I'm just conscious that anyone who's watching, if I didn't ask you the next question, they'd say, why didn't you ask them? You were talking about everyone has a favourite song. What's yours?
That's a good question.
I'll give you two options. I'll give you a spiritual or an ecclesiastical avenue, and then I'll give you one from maybe popular culture.
Okay. Well, I suppose You Raise Me Up, Josh Groban, is one of my favourite almost secular religious songs. For the simple reason is, and the reason why it's one of my favourite songs is because it really speaks about lifting ourselves up and moving on and keeping going. And the song really kind of says to us, that you raise me up, and that raising up could be done either by God or can be done by a friend or a relative or somebody who comes into our lives, picks us up and walks with us. My favourite religious song, well, that's a difficult one because I have many. How many do you need?
One. There's one. This is a desert island. This is a desert island ecclesiastical disc.
Believe it or not, one of my favourite religious pieces, a gospel piece, it's an African piece called Bambalela, right? And the word Bambalela means never give up. So it's kind of connected to Josh Groban's, You Raise Me Up.
I think we could have heard that a couple of years at the Darkness into Light, perhaps.
You are absolutely...
Am I bang on the money?
Well done, Edward. And I'm so glad you remembered.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Come here tonight, tell you, we're talking about your administering, that sense of care, that footprints in the sand and carrying people along,
yes.
being that figure. How do we recharge Willie? Where does Willie get respite? Where does he get that strength? Because I suppose as a community, if you have your church community, and again, the word pulling out of you is kind of almost a negative connotation, but you get what I mean. There's that sense of need, that they need you.
Yes.
How do you kind of ensure that you're fully charged and ready to give?
There's three things I really believe in. First of all, I believe in keeping contact with family and friends. And I think that's extremely important because if you're close to your family know you, they've grown up with you, they've watched you, they know your life, right? If you have friends, close friends particularly, friends who kind of know when you're down or know when you're up or know when to pick you up or know when to be distant from you, and that these are the friends who give you the energy and the solace in times of difficulty or struggle or just when life is confusing. I'm also an avid reader. Okay. And I mean, reading, right across the genre of books, really kind of gives me that inspiration that I need sometimes just to back off and take time and space just to reconnect. And also, I'm a great believer in silence and, walking through the Castle Park or walking out in Jenkinstown or going to Castlecomer or going to Mount Juliet or going to the Lyrath Walk or, wherever you go, taking space and time to appreciate, most important of all, nature. And I find in nature great strength. I find in the seasons great strength. because the changing of the seasons in many ways for me reflects the changing in my life. So I find great solace and I find great energy, and I find the sense of enthusiasm when I go into nature or embrace nature in its many seasons. So in all of those, they're my build-up times, my energy times, and they're my times for myself as well. And that gives me the kind of the strength and the courage to keep going.
If COVID-19 really wasn't precluding us from having continental travel, and I gave you a ticket to the Vatican to meet the Pope, what would you say to him in terms of this pride? He'd ask you where you're from, you'd say you're from Kilkenny. How would you demonstrate to him the sense of pride to be from Kilkenny and what Kilkenny means to you?
I've met Pope Francis 3 times.
So you're telling me the ticket should be null and void?
I can hand you back the tickets to Edward.
Give it to someone else.
Go on my behalf, right? I met Pope Francis 3 times. The first time he asked me where I was from, and I said I'm from Kilkenny, right? Which, obviously meant nothing to him. And then I said, Ireland, Kilkenny, a city in Ireland. And he says, Ireland. Ah, yes, this was before he came for the World Meeting Families. He said, Ireland, yes, very green, very, very green. So that was, and to make the connection with the question you're asking me, I suppose if I was to sell Kilkenny, I would sell it maybe under three headings. The first one is community and friendliness, 2, I suppose. Community and friendliness. And that in Kilkenny, there is this wonderful sense of community and friendliness that people, even when visitors come to visit me from Italy or from the US or from England or different parts of the world, they're always really taken by the sense of friendliness, that people say hello. And this kind of, I suppose, shows us for the people we are. And the second thing, I think, is that great sense of community, which you and I are involved in many different ways, but that great sense of community, that people come together, particularly, in times of difficulty or struggle, but you sense that when you walk through the streets, because people are, again, talking to each other, greeting one another, saying hello, how are you going, or the great Kilkenny saying, well. So, kind of there's this...
Which is all encompassing.
Which is all, there's nothing else to say, well, that's it. But in that sense that you have this wonderful thing as well. But again, I mentioned earlier on about John Bradley, Lord have mercy on him, who was this wonderful archaeologist, and a very kind of strong historian in Kilkenny. But John used to always say, and has kind of recalled in his books, he would always say, the beauty of Kilkenny is the merging of the medieval and the modern. And that when you walk down the streets in Kilkenny, whether it's you're passing the Shiam's house or the town hall or Roath House or the courthouse or St Mary's Cathedral, the medieval mile, whether you're hitting the Black Abbey, the Friary, St Canice's Cathedral, or wherever you're hitting, there is this wonderful sense of history. And there's this wonderful sense of belonging to a history that we're proud of, that has been kind of immersed and merged into the modern. So if I was to say to Pope Francis, the reason why you should come to Kilkenny is this, because if you come to Kilkenny, you will experience a city and county that is not only friendly, that is not only based on a wonderful sense of community, but also has a history, and a history that we're proud of.
The final question I'll ask you, Willie, if I was the Pope and I asked you to be my advisor and say, Father Willie Purcell, can you tell me one thing that would help to bring about change or improvement in the community of the Church?
Yes.
What is it?
I think I would say there is a need for greater communication. I think Pope Francis said one time, which I really loved, he said that all of us, priests, religious and people, that we need to get down and have the smell of the sheep off of us, which is the Psalm 23, the Good Shepherd. And in that sense, I think I would say to him that we need to enter more fully into the lives of people, and we need to enter more fully into the lives of community. I would say to him, I think we need to enter more fully into the lives of the poor, the marginalised, the migrant, the forgotten, the unloved, and those who feel oppressed, or those perhaps who feel that they don't belong, that they don't have a sense of belonging to not just church, but to community or society or culture. And I think I would say to him that, what we need to do is we really need to change our attitude so that we need to become part of rather than distant from.
Okay, well, there we'll leave it. Thank you
for
sharing your insights into it, and definitely a well-known and much loved, respected figure of Kilkenny. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Edward.